I stood in the bank, holding my account statement. $50,000 had vanished. Your wife withdrew it, the employee explained. In that moment, I realized, she wasn't just cheating on me, she was preparing to escape with my money. I met Hannah at a networking event in Chicago 7 years ago. She stood out immediately, not just because of her striking looks, with wavy chestnut hair and intelligent green eyes, but because of how she carried herself. Confidence without arrogance. When she introduced herself as a financial consultant, I was intrigued. By the end of the night, we'd exchanged numbers. Our relationship progressed quickly. Within 6 months, we were living together in my downtown apartment. She was everything I thought I wanted, ambitious, supportive, and seemed genuinely interested in my dreams. When I talked about opening my own architecture firm, she didn't just nod politely, she asked questions, offered suggestions, even introduced me to potential investors from her network. "You have vision, Michael," she would say, rubbing my shoulders after I'd spent hours hunched over designs. "You just need someone to help with the practical side of things." That someone, she implied, was her. 2 years into our relationship, I proposed. The wedding was small but elegant, just like she wanted. My parents, who lived in Seattle, flew in for the ceremony. My father pulled me aside at the reception. "She's a keeper, son," he said, clapping my shoulder. "Smart as a whip. Just make sure you keep some things separate, you know. Mom and I have always had our own accounts." I laughed it off. "Dad, we're not from your generation. We're partners in everything." How ironic those words would become. When I finally secured a loan to start my firm, Hannah was ecstatic. She offered to handle the financial side while I focused on building the business. It seemed perfect, she had the expertise, after all. "Let me add you to the accounts," I suggested one evening. "It'll be easier for you to manage things." She kissed me on the cheek. "That's so thoughtful, honey. It would definitely be more convenient." Fool that I was, I didn't just add her as an authorized user, I made her a joint holder on everything: checking, savings, business accounts, even my retirement fund. She had complete access to our financial life. The first 3 years of my business were a roller coaster. There were months when I barely slept, taking on any project that came my way. Hannah remained supportive, or so I thought. She would bring dinner to the office on late nights, listen to my frustrations, celebrate the small victories. "We're building something together," she would say. "Your success is our success." I believed her. Completely. The first warning sign appeared 4 years into our marriage. I noticed unusual transactions on our joint credit card, expensive restaurants I'd never been to, hotel charges in neighboring states, boutique purchases that never seemed to materialize as gifts or clothes in our home. When I casually mentioned it over dinner, her response was immediate and rehearsed. "Oh, those restaurants were client meetings," she said, reaching for her wine glass. "The hotel was when I visited my mother in Indianapolis. I told you about that trip. And the boutique charges? Your anniversary gift, silly. I was going to surprise you." Our anniversary was 4 months away. But I nodded and smiled. The doubt was there, but I pushed it away. Hannah had never given me reason to distrust her before. Then came the late nights at the office. The business trips that seemed to multiply. The texts she would quickly hide when I entered the room. Classic signs, I know now, but love makes you willfully blind. It was Jason, my business partner, who finally said something. We were reviewing quarterly expenses when he frowned at the screen. "Mike, what's this transfer to an external account? 50 grand last month." I leaned in. "What transfer?" "Right here. To First Midwest Bank. It's not one of our vendor accounts." My stomach twisted. "Let me see that." It was authorized under my credentials, but I hadn't made the transfer. There was only one other person who had access. That night, I asked Hannah about it directly. She was preparing for a conference in Boston. "Honey, that was for the investment property we discussed," she said without looking up from her packing. "The opportunity came up suddenly, and I didn't want to bother you while you were finalizing the Westlake project." We had casually discussed investment properties, but never settled on anything concrete. Certainly nothing that would warrant a $50,000 transfer without discussion. "Which property?" I pressed. "The duplex in Lincoln Park. I sent you the details in an email a few weeks ago." She zipped her suitcase. "Check your spam folder, sometimes my messages end up there." There was no email. I checked every folder that night while she slept. Nothing. The next morning, after she left for her conference, I did something I never thought I would do. I checked her personal laptop, which she'd accidentally left behind in her rush. What I found shattered any remaining trust one had. Emails to a man named David. Intimate messages. Photos I can't unsee. Plans to meet in Boston, not for a conference, but for a romantic getaway. And buried in her drafts folder, a half-written email to a realtor in California about purchasing a home. Using our money. My money. I closed the laptop and sat in silence for an hour. The betrayal was profound, but it was the calculation behind it that truly stunned me. This wasn't a momentary lapse or a recent affair. The emails dated back almost 2 years. She had been living a double life, systematically preparing for her exit. Instead of confronting her immediately, I decided to be strategic. I called my college friend Sarah, who had become a respected attorney. "Mike, based on what you're telling me, you need to protect yourself immediately," she advised. "Joint accounts mean she has legal access to withdraw everything. We need to act fast." Over the next week, I followed Sarah's advice meticulously. I opened new accounts at a different bank. I spoke with financial advisors about freezing assets. I documented everything I found. And I hired a private investigator to track Hannah's activities in Boston. The investigator's report came with photographs: Hannah and David at dinner, holding hands across the table. Hannah and David entering his apartment building. The timestamps showed she wasn't attending any conference sessions during those hours. When Hannah returned from Boston, she was glowing. "The conference was so productive," she lied, kissing me on the cheek. "I made some great connections." I simply nodded. "That's wonderful." 2 days later, I received a call from our bank's fraud department. There had been an attempt to withdraw $250,000 from our joint investment account. The transaction had been flagged due to the unusually large amount. "Did you authorize this, Mr. Reynolds?" the representative asked. "No," I said calmly. "I did not. Your wife came in person. She has signatory authority." "I understand. Please flag all accounts for review before any large withdrawals." After hanging up, I went to the bank in person. I needed to see the withdrawal slip with my own eyes. The manager showed me the documentation. Hannah's elegant signature was unmistakable. I stood in the bank, holding my account statement. $50,000 had already vanished before I caught on. Another $250,000 would have followed if the bank hadn't called. "Your wife withdrew it," the employee explained again, unnecessarily. In that moment, I realized with complete clarity, she wasn't just cheating on me, she was preparing to escape with my money. Thanks to Sarah's quick action, I had already moved most of our assets to protected accounts. The $50,000 was painful but not devastating. What Hannah didn't know was that she had already lost the war before firing her final shot. When I returned home that evening, Hannah was cooking dinner, something she rarely did anymore. The scent of roasting chicken filled the house, and she had opened a bottle of our expensive wine. "I thought we could use a nice evening at home," she said, smiling warmly. "You've been so stressed lately." I kissed her on the forehead. "That sounds perfect. We ate dinner and talked about nothing important. She asked about my latest project. I asked about her clients. We performed the dance of a normal married couple while I watched her lie with practiced ease. After dinner, she suggested we go away for the weekend. Just the two of us. To reconnect. That sounds nice, I said. Where were you thinking? Maybe Napa. We could do some wine tasting, stay at that boutique hotel you've been wanting to try. I nodded thoughtfully. When would you want to go? This weekend, she suggested. I could book everything tomorrow. This weekend. When the next bank statement would arrive. When she would discover that her access to our funds had been restricted. When her plan would unravel. Let me check my calendar, I said. I might have a client meeting on Friday. That night, I pretended to sleep while she texted someone, the blue light from her phone illuminating her face in the darkness. I could guess who was on the other end. The next morning, I called the private investigator again and asked him to continue surveillance. If Hannah and David had plans to leave together, I wanted documentation. It took 3 days for everything to come to a head. I returned home early to find Hannah frantically packing a suitcase. What's going on? I asked from the doorway. She startled. Michael. I didn't hear you come in. She composed herself quickly. My mother called. She's not feeling well. I'm going to stay with her for a few days. Another lie. Her mother had passed away 2 years earlier, a fact she seemed to have momentarily forgotten in her panic. Your mother, I repeated flatly. Her eyes widened slightly as she realized her mistake. I meant my aunt. You know, I always called her Mom after Mother died. She didn't have an aunt she was close to. The lies were becoming desperate. I sat down on the edge of the bed. Hannah, let's stop this. Stop what? Her hands trembled as she folded a blouse. I know about David. She froze. Who? I know about the house in California. I know about the money you've been taking. I know about the trips, the hotels, the restaurants. I know everything. Her face went through a series of expressions: shock, denial, calculation, and finally, defiance. You don't understand, she said, straightening. It's not what you think. Then explain it to me. She sat beside me, her mind visibly racing to construct a narrative that could explain away the evidence. David is a business associate. I've been consulting on a project in California. The money was for investment purposes. I was going to surprise you once everything was finalized. I almost admired her ability to improvise. Almost. Hannah, I said quietly. I've seen the emails. I've seen the photos. The private investigator documented your weekend in Boston quite thoroughly. Her expression hardened. You had me followed. You invaded my privacy. The audacity of her indignation was almost laughable. She was caught in multiple betrayals yet positioning herself as the victim. I trusted you with everything, I said. My heart, my home, my business, my money. It's our money, she snapped. Not anymore. Her eyes narrowed. What does that mean? It means I've moved our assets. The accounts you tried to empty are frozen. The property you were trying to buy in California. The funding will never clear. She stood up, anger replacing her calculated composure. You can't do that. It's already done. She grabbed her phone. I'm calling my lawyer. Good idea. You'll need one. I handed her a manila envelope. These are divorce papers. Sarah had them drawn up last week. Hannah's hands shook as she opened the envelope. Her eyes scanned the documents, widening as she reached the financial sections. This is ridiculous, she hissed. I'm entitled to half of everything. Under normal circumstances, perhaps. But fraud, theft, and documented infidelity change the equation considerably. The judge will have access to all the evidence I've collected. Evidence? You mean your invasion of my privacy? Your paranoid delusions? I pulled out my phone and played one of the recordings the PI had made, Hannah and David discussing their future plans, laughing about how clueless I was, planning how they would use my money to start their new life. Her face drained of color. I think we're done here, I said, standing. You can take your personal belongings. The rest stays until the court decides. Michael, wait, her tone changed completely, becoming soft, pleading. We can work this out. I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. But 7 years together has to mean something. It did mean something. To me. I walked to the door. You have until tomorrow to collect your things. After that, the locks will be changed. You can't just throw me out. This is my home too. Actually, it's not. The house is in my name. I bought it before we were married. You never asked to be added to the deed. It was the one thing she had overlooked in her careful planning. The one detail that worked in my favor. I left her standing there, surrounded by half-packed suitcases, her carefully constructed world collapsing around her. As I walked down the stairs, I heard something shatter against the wall. A vase, perhaps, or a picture frame. The sound of her rage was oddly satisfying. The divorce proceedings were ugly, as expected. Hannah hired an aggressive attorney who tried to paint me as controlling and abusive. But evidence speaks louder than accusations. The documented theft, the affair, the calculated deception, it all weighed heavily against her. In the end, she left with significantly less than she had planned. No $1 million California home. No comfortable nest egg stolen from my business. No alimony to fund her new life with David. The last time I saw her was in the courthouse after the final hearing. She looked smaller somehow, her confident posture diminished. As she passed me in the hallway, she paused. I did love you once, she said quietly. In the beginning. I looked at her, searching for the woman I had believed in for 7 years. Was any of it real? She hesitated, then shrugged. Does it matter now? I watched her walk away, her heels clicking on the marble floor. The victory I had anticipated felt hollow. I had won, yes. I had protected myself financially. I had exposed her betrayal and thwarted her plans. But I had lost something I could never recover, the belief that I could truly know another person's heart. 3 months later, I received a text message from an unknown number. David left. He found someone else. Karma, I guess. I didn't respond. Some circles closed themselves. Sometimes I wonder if Hannah ever understood what she threw away, not just the material comfort or the stability, but the genuine partnership we could have had. Other times, I wonder if I ever really knew her at all, or if I had simply fallen in love with a carefully crafted illusion. The business continues to thrive. I've become more cautious, more reserved in both my professional and personal life. Trust comes slowly now, if at all. The new accounts remain solely in my name. The lessons were expensive, but thoroughly learned. Occasionally, I'll catch myself looking at old photos, searching for signs I might have missed, clues that could have warned me earlier. But the woman in those pictures shows nothing but authentic happiness. Perhaps that's the most unsettling realization. Some people can live completely within a lie, making it appear as genuine as the sunrise. I've dated sporadically since the divorce, but nothing serious has developed. Friends tell me I need to move forward, to not let Hannah's betrayal define my future. They're right, of course. But caution is a difficult habit to break once it's been carved into your bones by experience. Last week, I ran into Sarah at a local coffee shop. She asked how I was doing. Better, I told her. And it wasn't entirely a lie. The sharp edges of betrayal have dulled somewhat with time. She reached out to me, Sarah admitted, stirring her latte. Hannah. She wanted to know if there was any way to reopen the settlement. And I told her the case was closed. Sarah hesitated. She's struggling, Mike. The job in California fell through. David's gone. She's back in Chicago, trying to rebuild. I felt nothing at this news. Not satisfaction. Not pity. Just a strange, detached acknowledgement. Do you ever regret how things played out? Sarah asked. I considered the question carefully. I regret not seeing the truth sooner. I regret the years wasted on someone who saw me as a means to an end. But the way I handled it once I knew? No. I don't regret protecting myself. Sarah nodded. For what it's worth, I think you did the right thing. As I left the coffee shop, I caught a glimpse of a woman across the street who resembled Hannah. Same height, same walk. For a moment, I froze, old instincts surging back. But it wasn't her. Just a stranger with a passing resemblance. I realized then that Hannah would always be a part of me, not as the woman I loved, but as the lesson I learned. The scar that reminds you to be more careful next time. Some say living well is the best revenge. Perhaps. But I've found that the most satisfying revenge is reclaiming your own story. Taking back the pen from those who tried to write your ending for you. Hannah thought she was writing my final chapter. She never realized she was merely a character in mine.